So I thought today we would talk about something that's a little bit more of a serious topic, and that is what it's like to contemplate death if you're, like me, an agnostic. So my life perspective is, first and above all, that the truth is what we must seek. Not what we want the truth to be, not what someone tells us the truth is, but simply the unvarnished, complete truth, as much as we are able to discern it. I was raised a Christian, and I find a lot of comfort and meaning in the symbolism of Christianity. I also find a lot of comfort and meaning in the symbolism of the Elder Scrolls and fantasy worlds of many different sorts, and philosophy and mythology, Eastern religions, and pretty much everything you could possibly find in human history. To teach, to admonish, to warn us. I don't really hold myself chained to any one particular ideology, any one particular belief system, or even any one particular interpretation of what truth really is. The reality is, as far as I can tell, that we are part of something greater than ourselves. That would seem to be self-evident in nature. As we perish, we are reborn. In some form, life, when it ends, becomes the basis, the building block for new life, which is to come. As Carl Sagan once said, we are a way for the universe to know itself, made of stardust. Maybe we're living in a simulation. I don't know. We all have this fear of mortality baked into us, a desire to live forever, and also a knowledge that we have a temporary period of time to live. And that's okay. We ask a lot of questions and we like absolute answers. But truth is something which is above our ability to completely understand. And so it's sort of like Santa Claus. You go tell a child the story of Santa Claus, and you say to that child, if you're a good boy or girl, then Santa Claus will come down the chimney and give you gifts in exchange for the cookies and milk you're going to leave out for him on Christmas Eve. And the child understands this in a literal way at first, thinking that there is indeed this jovial man who will come and deliver gifts on Christmas. But then as time goes on, the child comes to a realization that Santa Claus doesn't exist in the physical sense, while he does exist in the spiritual sense. Santa Claus represents something which is real: love and kindness, good behavior, moral values, family values, all of those principles of kindness and goodness which Christmas represents. And as we become adults and we move through life, perhaps we still believe in Santa Claus for our entire life, even though we know that Santa Claus, as a large fat man who goes through chimneys all over the world, is in fact not true. So it is with faith. Faith in all its living forms, It's a way for us as simple creatures to grasp an understandable picture of things which would otherwise be untangible. It's a way for us to understand without knowing, to live by the guide of truth, even when some of those truths are beyond what we have the knowledge or the capacity to fully grasp. It's sort of like the goddess Justitia, who would stand with her eyes blindfolded, holding the scales of justice. She was a classical goddess to represent justice back when the word justice didn't exist, because it was the goddess Justitia which would give birth to the word justice, which today continues to adorn and guide our courthouses and our palaces of law around the world, especially in the West. So, we had mysticism to teach us before we had language to guide us. And I think that's very beautiful. That's how I see Christianity and all of the different faiths of the world, as guideposts to give us pictures and parables that we can use to help understand hope, which is an abstract that we perhaps otherwise would struggle to visualize. And yet that does not mean that I believe in any particular religion in a literal way. But I don't feel like life is made less rich because I don't believe in aspects of mythology in a literal sense. Just like how I can play the Elder Scrolls and I can appreciate all of the lore of the game, despite the fact that I know it was created by game developers at Bethesda. It's not really real, and yet it's real because it tells a story that reflects principles that are real, even if the actors and the stories are not. But where does that leave us when we get through our lives and we approach the end of our lives? And I guess I could say, first of all, that I don't think too much about death because I don't really anticipate that I'm going to be dead extremely soon. I plan to have quite a few more years of my life that I can spend doing things, exploring fantasy worlds, reading literature, going to work on Mondays. So I'm going to be the first to say I don't think about death probably as much as people who know that they're close to the end of their life. For example, Warren Buffett, the old, wealthy man, still the head of Berkshire Hathaway. When he makes letters to the investors each year, now, being pragmatic as he is, he can't help but avoid the need to talk about plans for his own death. Because he knows that even if he's in good health today, he's not going to live forever. And yet, the truth is, none of us are guaranteed a long life. Any one of us, whether young or old, could find that the end of our lives has found us even today. So, thinking about death is not something which is just for the old. It really is something which all of us probably do think about and must think about. Even if we don't make a big deal out of it every day, we do think about it. Now, Now, if you're of a religious sort, then maybe it's easy because you just think to yourself, well, I'm going to live until I die, and then I'm going to go to heaven, and I will live forever there. So all it really is like a server transfer. All you're saying is, I'm going to go from the tutorial area to the new zone. Like, that's all you're going to say. But what about those of us who don't necessarily have religion to be grounded in? What do we have? Well, what we have, I suppose, is this knowledge that life doesn't end just because one person's life ends. You see, it goes on, like a great recycling center. So if my life isn't all that I wanted it to be, there's going to be a great host of other lives which will continue onward to be all the things which I never will be. And if we make mistakes in this time we live in, there will be an eternity ahead where life will rise and life will fall, and it will be reborn again and again. And so you see, whether we are people of faith in a religious sense or people of science, the reality is we agree fully that life doesn't end with us. And that is a great source of hope. As for what it means for me, you know, the interesting thing is Christianity would teach you to understand that this life is not yours. This world is not your home. You're just passing through, as a hymn famously written put it. And the truth is, science teaches us the same thing. We are part of something much greater than ourselves. Something that we cannot begin to understand. Today we see as through a veil, darkly. But one day, face to face. So you see, we don't need complete understanding to be part of a complete whole. And that is comforting. It's interesting how, whether you look at life through the lens of science or through the lens of faith, there really is no difference. We're just here to be stewards for a time of a small piece, a small speck of a greater whole. And while it is ours to enjoy, it is not ours to possess. We're just here for a little while. Of course, we do want to do good in the world, to do good with our lives, because it stands to reason whether you're saying you're trying to get to heaven, or if it's just rational self-interest. A house divided against itself cannot stand. So there is no cause for us to do anything other than to wish well for the world that we are part of, to try to leave it better than we found it. And yet I think I have the better end of the stick, because for all of those people who worship God, there is a certain threat of wrath. There is a certain darkness there, which says that if you do not do the right things, if you don't believe the right things, if you don't align with the right tribe, then there might be hellfire and damnation. There might be eternal suffering to pay for the things which you have done. And so for those people, there's always a certain sense of dread. Perhaps even a question of whether they will be good enough to get the top tier in the heavenly server beyond. And there's also that knowledge that somehow it all just doesn't quite add up. Kind of like a kid who knows Santa Claus is fake, but doesn't really want to believe it. The fear of betrayal, knowing how much it would cost in this life if we acknowledged that we were deceived by the people who tried to tell us what the path to absolute truth was. Because you see, as an agnostic, if I proved that something was not true, I would just not believe it anymore. But for the religious faithful, there is no option to just not believe something because it was proven to be false. For them, their families, their communities, their entire ethos and identity is rooted in this knowledge that something is an absolute, whether it is or it isn't. And so they have to always find a way to quiet that voice inside that has a little bit of doubt. For me, there is no doubt because there is no fear. There is only the truth and the knowledge that I would like to know the truth as much as I can. And also the understanding that as a small creature such as I never will know the entirety of the truth, and yet a shadow of it is enough to provide peace and context for the journey that I'm on. All things considered, I think that you can be an agnostic, a person who doesn't really believe in anything other than that which can be proven, while also having a certain sense of devotion to God. Not because I'm religious, but because I understand that God is simply the sum of all things. All that there is a word for and all that there isn't a word for. All that ever is, or was, or is to come. God is a placeholder for all the things that we still do not know. And so, because there is so much that we don't know, whether we're religious or not, it stands to reason that we all together should strive to serve God in our own way. Now, I know to a lot of religious people that's all sacrilege, and I do think that it all adds up to a bit of a lonely path, because I see every Sunday the churches are filled with people who believe. And I suppose on the militant left, there's a lot of people who are so obsessed with not believing that they want to tear down all of the establishment, and they hate any symbols of religion or old traditional faith. I don't have much in common with them either. To me, life is just beautiful in all of its forms. All of the different aspects of faith are beautiful in their own right, as long as they're appreciated and admired in balance. But life can be lonely when you don't really believe what other people believe, and when they don't really accept you in earnest, unless you do. But as for the end of life, as for that question of what would I do? What would I think about if I was going to die tomorrow? I suppose the truth is I wouldn't think a whole lot of it one way or another. Because It's sort of like a tree that grows tall and then grows old and then decays. How would you ever look at a tree that has perished and say that it is a loss to nature? You simply couldn't ever fathom to do that, because in the stumps and the fallen logs there will be little animals that make their homes and mushrooms that grow. And one day, from the forest floor of a place ravaged by fire, new life will grow. New trees will be born. And even if all things on earth perish, still somewhere in the cosmos life will flourish, as it always does. So there is no loss that I could experience that would be a loss to the universe. So I am blessed for the opportunity to live. But since my life is not my own, I really have no reason to be ashamed or angry or sad or frightened when the time comes for me to give back that which never was mine. Anyway, you see, there is this notion that if you're looking for peace, you have to look very hard to find it. But there is also a notion that you don't have to look very hard at all to find peace, because the path to it is nothing more or less than understanding that it's a state where you've always been anyway. You see, it's not about finding something, the pot at the base of the rainbow. It's just realizing what you've always already had. That you need nothing to add to your life in order to make it enough. To quote a Bible verse, it was written that God has adorned the lilies of the valley with such beauty, despite the fact that they have asked not for it. So, how much more do you think God will care for you if He has given such even to them? Certainly, we have been beautifully and wonderfully made, even if sometimes in all of the tumult of life, we find that hard to see. So, to put it in short, I think it's quite easy to have a sense of peace in life, whether you follow a path of faith, a path of science, or perhaps a path somewhere in between. As always, invest your life in things which bring joy, which bear good fruit, which serve both you and others in a way that is kind and uplifting. Because we'll never look back on our lives and think that we wish we would have been more unkind, more hostile, more self-centered, more combative. Instead, we'll always look back on our life and think well of the times when we chose to be kind and patient, loving whether love was deserved, understanding whether we felt a sense of kinship with others or not, just because it's better to uplift others than it is to tear them down. And it's better to forgive yourself than to always accept this notion that somehow you aren't good enough. When the reality is, that you are. Good luck on your adventure, as always. Till next time. Thanks so much for watching.